Welcome to In This Body, a podcast where we dive deep into the potent power of embodiment. I'm your host, Ailey and Jolie, a psychotherapist deeply passionate about living life fully from the wisdom within your very own body. The podcast In This Body is a love letter to embodiment, a podcast dedicated to asking important questions like, how does connecting to your body change your life? How does connecting to your body enhance your capacity to love more deeply and live more authentically? And how can collective embodiment alter the course of our shared world? Join me for consciously curated conversations with leading experts. Each episode is intended to support you in reconnecting to your very own body. This podcast will be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, making it easy for you to stay connected to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey and Jolie. Welcome to this episode of In This Body. I'm your host, Ailey and Jolie, and today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Darragh Stewart. Darragh is the co-founder of InwardBound, a psilocybin retreat organization in the Netherlands that integrates science, spirituality, and ancient traditions to support profound healing. He holds a doctorate in plant genetics and is deeply involved in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy and integration, offering a unique perspective on the intersection of science and soul. In our conversation today, we'll explore the transformative potential of psychedelics in embodiment and healing. We'll discuss the role of ancestral traditions, integration practices, intergenerational trauma, and the challenges of navigating altered states of consciousness when trying to heal. We will also spend some time exploring masculinity. Darragh, thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to In This Body, the podcast with me, Ailey and Jolie. I'm going to start with a question that I've began to ask every guest on this podcast, and it is, what does being in your body mean to you?
Yeah, great question. It's definitely a relationship for me that I've been cultivating over the last 10 years because I think as a kind of classic Irish man, I was very disconnected from my body. So being in my body to me means being able to, deeply understand its needs, understand its signals, whether it's a hell yes or a no. And being able to, access, the kind of the good feelings, the joy, the bliss, as well as pay attention to, the not so good feelings and using them as kind of a compass to how to orientate my life. So I think I'll go with that.
Before I ask you how being in your body plays into the work that you do today, for the listeners who are not familiar with your work at InwardBound, could you share the story behind what you've created and what you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. So InwardBound is a beautiful co-collaboration of wonderful humans who facilitate the transformation and growth of people from all around the world. The center point is a psychedelic retreat in the Netherlands with 2 high doses of psilocybin containing truffles. So we founded the retreat organization in 2018. So we're 6 years actually, six year birthday this month. And it's really a blend of different backgrounds. So we work in a very holistic, full spectrum approach from, medicine women, medicine men, psychological coaches, behavioral therapists, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, shamanic practitioners, scientists. And we've really, over the last 6 years, kind of developed a kind of full spectrum program for people working with psychedelics. So, they have 6 weeks of preparation with calls and full screening to make sure that they're suitable for working with psychedelics, because as we know, psychedelics are not for everybody. And we want to really prepare people so they can get the most from the high doses. The retreat, beautiful space with all the bells and whistles, embodiment
Mm.
practices, yoga, meditation. People do the 2 high doses, and then a follow-up integration program, and then access to ongoing integration for life if people need it, and resources. So that's been the main center point of my work for the last 6 years. And another big kind of offshoot of that has been working with men and organizing men's circles, men's work in Ireland because we can't work with psychedelics in
Mm.
Ireland legally. So the men's work's been a big venture here, working around the hero's journey, archetypes, coming in from a very kind of Jungian depth psychology place, rites of passage, helping men initiate themselves into manhood, responsibility, sovereignty, taking ownership of their lives. And just, cracking them open, creating vulnerability and getting men in their bodies. My journey has been really getting, in touch with my emotions and my body and vulnerability. And that's a big mission of mine here in Ireland to also facilitate that for other men. So they're the kind of the two pillars of my work at the moment. Do lots of other little bits and pieces on the side, but they're the main things that my passion and energy is going into these days.
I'm going to circle back and ask you about masculinity and embodiment because it's a topic that is so near and dear to my heart. But I know that you come from a background in science pretty heavily, and I would love to hear from you how you went from such rigid academia and kind of the rigor that's instilled in that area to facilitating psychedelic experiences in the Netherlands and creating this whole co-collaborative organization around really supporting the expansiveness of consciousness and deeper healing.
Yeah, it was a really big thing, to study for 10 years in Trinity College Dublin, one of the, the best universities in Ireland. To all of a sudden just completely leave all that behind and take a whole different, almost like black sheep career direction. I remember one of the biggest moments. I was like, mom and dad, I need to tell you something, and they were like, oh, like we sat down and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to pursue this science career anymore. I'm going to open up a psychedelic retreat business. They were like, what? But they were so supportive in it because they kind of knew my journey, and my journey
Mm,
was that it was a journey of suffering ultimately. Uh, a few kind of things happened to me during my PhD over the space of kind of 2 years. And anybody who's done a PhD, that container is already incredibly stressful, incredibly demanding and draining. And I was going around as what I describe now as like a high functioning, anxious individual. So very tightly wound up, tightly strung. And, you know, I chose on reflection, I chose the avenue of molecular genetics, which is one of the more hardcore aspects of biological science. As like this kind of overachiever, wanted to prove myself in the world. Oh, I'll pick one of the hardest ones and I'll go for it. And then really life hit me in some unexpected ways. My grandmother died. She was the first person to die in my reality who I loved. I broke up with my partner at the time. We were going out for 10 years since I was in our early teens. My mum almost died of a stroke and then pneumonia. And, I had all of these kind of micro traumas
mm.
that kind of got on top of me and I couldn't really deal with. And it sent me into a deep depression and kind of an existential identity crisis. Um, and I kind of really just had a moment one day where I looked at myself. I had spontaneous crying and had physical pains in my body, and it was really suffering. And I had just this very clear moment of, something needs to change. Is this for me? Is this direction? Is this path? Is it for me? Um, and that led me into meditation and yoga, and I got a lot of massage therapy on my body and got a massive benefit and massive relief from that. So I actually trained as a massage therapist in the evenings of my postdoc, thinking that this would be like my first avenue out of science if I actually need to and want to go. So kind of a bit of strategy there, setting myself up. But I very quickly, got into holistic way of living, met people in the holistic sphere, started to hear about all these other practices, and then, came across psychedelics. And very lucky here in Ireland that, magic mushrooms grow all over Ireland at this time of year. So I got introduced to psilocybin containing mushrooms And for me, it was just like a door open, something
Mm.
unlocked, where I was able to do a profound amount of deep healing on myself, introspection, cathartic releases. And I thought, wow, this is something that I feel is so special, so sacred, so wonderful, and this needs to be brought into the world. So around that time, I met my friend at the time and now business partner, Rob Coffey. And then that started the journey of we went into men's work first. So we've been holding men's work and men's retreats and circles for the last just over 7 years. And then after kind of a while of doing that, then we set up InwardBound because we wanted to bring our own Indigenous medicine to the
Mm.
world out of the need. So I very quickly went from a place of doing a lot of deep healing over the space of a number of years to being in a place of I want to give this back. I want to be in service. I want to give this to the world because I feel
Mm.
so strongly and so passionately about these beautiful healers that we have. And, being a nerd, being an academic, then I just threw my whole mind into the psychedelic sphere, healing, um, understanding how to, do things in a best practice way and, what was the science happening at the time. And, really lucky. I feel like I'm so lucky because all of the research had just started, all the stuff at Imperial College. So it's just really exciting time. It's kind of like a wonderful timing thing for me as well. So
Mhm.
um, that's kind of it. Yeah, how I transitioned. And a lot of my friends said, wow, Darragh, you've done like a 180, you've completely changed in your values, what you enjoyed, where you spent your time. I just really got a whole sense of, this is how I want to live my life. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to give to the world. Because I originally got into science thinking that, I could create positive change like most people
Mm.
do in the science world, but science can really string you out and wring you
Mhm.
out, you know. So this was kind of more tangible for me. So it's been a beautiful journey.
One question I have for you on your journey is psychedelics often have a misconception that they can take you out of your body because they are so expansive. I'm
Mm.
curious for you how they actually maybe helped you come back into your body. Because as I was hearing, you kind of said, like, my values changed, my lifestyle changed, where I was hanging out. All of that sounds like deeper alignment to authenticity. And that can happen with psychedelics, as I have lived. And I've also lived, it can take me so far away from myself that I don't even know who I am. Could you speak to the paradox of that in your experience personally, but also professionally in supporting others too?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a really interesting paradox, and I had actually insights into this, into my own experience a number of years ago. I think, for me, very quickly with psychedelics, I was able to um understand the kind of deeper therapeutic relationship that you can have with them.
Mm.
So, some of my first MDMA experiences were some of the most therapeutic moments of my life. I was able to see my consciousness from another perspective lens and offer myself self-love and, very much connection to myself and to my heart. So for me, I was very lucky, I suppose, that I realized, whoa, there's actually deep therapeutic value in these substances. Same with psilocybin and 2CB. These were kind of the first ones that I really did a lot of deep work with. 2CB, wonderful phenylethylamine, lots of introspection and kind of has that kind of empathogenic effect too. So lots of kind of self-love. Um, so I think, my intention and the reason that I was partaking in working with these was I think the main reason why I was having these kind of really beautiful therapeutic experiences. I wasn't on the other end of the spectrum where I was, a lot of people take psychoactive substances and psychedelics for escaping, for
Hmm.
escapism. I want to get out of my body. I want to blow off steam for the weekend. I want to go to a club. I want to go to a festival. Of course, I did have moments of that there. I think, everybody has to experience that when working with psychedelics. But for me, I really felt like, oh, there's something greater here. If I use these
Mm.
in a more intentional, connected, sacred way, they can have bigger and better and greater benefits for me. So then I started to look for, people that were working with psychedelics and using them in that kind of way, in a ceremonial context, in an intentional way, in a sacred way. Because I know, like any of these substances, they can be a way out for a lot of
Mhm.
people, especially the dissociatives, getting out of our body. And, ketamine is one of the most popular psychedelics now here
Mhm.
in Ireland and the UK. And that is the out of body experience. It is the
Mhm.
escape. This is too much. It's too overwhelming. I'm not comfortable. I'm not safe in my body. I need to leave. So yeah, for me, it's intentionality, and really asking, why am I using this? What's the motivation? And kind of, yeah, I suppose treating them as wonderful allies and tools for going inward.
Can you say a little bit more about creating a healing relationship with a psychedelic? Like you've named intentionality. What goes through my head is also set and setting. Are there any other aspects that you think of when you think of creating that type of relationship with a psychedelic?
Yeah, good question. I think, very, very lucky that, magic mushrooms grow here on the land in
Mhm.
Ireland. So I think coming from more of the kind of shamanic background, or kind of this ancestral medicine, because we didn't really have shamans in Ireland. We had, druids.
Mhm.
Um, so, even just being out on the land and connecting to nature and seeing, some of the psychedelics, most of the psychedelics or psychoactive substances come from nature, and having that kind of relationship with nature, seeing them as nature, seeing us as nature, and what they're actually doing is they're just bringing us home to that fact
Mm.
that, we're, part of this whole microcosm of consciousness and energy. So, very lucky that I was able to have that relationship. And, when I've sat with, indigenous people from around the world, they also have that relationship to nature and the natural world, to the elements, all of these wonderful forces that can help us ground into the present moment and see ourselves as kind of connected.
I would love to hear a little bit from you because it might be a little bit of selfish question. I absolutely fell in love with Ireland when I was there this fall. It was so special and just felt deeply containing in a way that I don't think I've felt anywhere else in the world. And there's reasons for that that go back into my history. Not that it has been my home, but I would love to hear from you how psilocybin specifically is rooted into your identity, acknowledging it does grow on the land right where you are. Something that oftentimes I find in the psychedelic community is it is kind of put with South American culture or a little bit with African culture, but not necessarily with European culture, even though it was used by the Druids and further back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we look at if you look at a lot of the sacred sites in Ireland, the most powerful, energetic places in the country, psilocybin mushrooms grow around all those places.
Oh.
And it's not a coincidence that, the mycelial network is thousands of years old. And, it's no coincidence that some of these places that are older than the pyramids here in Ireland, like Newgrange, that, magic mushrooms grow all around these places. So there is this kind of deep connection to power places and sacred sites and these kind of mushrooms. And we look at some of the art as well that is seen across the kind of the stones that's carved in the stones. It looks like these kind of patterns that you see on high doses of magic
Mm.
mushrooms, lots of spirals and fractals and geometry. So, you know, it's kind of very much theorized that these people knew about them, like back then there was no distractions. People would have been deeply connected with their natural world. Of course, they would have known that these mushrooms were psychoactive and could create these incredible experiences, and it's unfortunate for Europe because, I think that, the Inquisition, Catholicism, burning the witches,
Mhm.
kind of medicine kind of taking over, or Western medicine taking over. A lot of these kind of old ways, herbalism ways, were really lost or shunned upon. It was at one point in Ireland, it was dangerous to actually practice herbal medicine, when we were being colonized and kind of subjugated by the British. and the Catholic Church, it was seen as, you were a witch or, um, a threat to society. So, a lot of the lineages were broken, a lot of the knowledge was lost, but it's very much still encoded into our myth and our folklore and our stories and our music. It's a very magical country. Um, Lots of, creativity, poets, musicians, writers, and some of the myths and legends of like leprechauns and fairy people and the she and little people, these are all kind of related to, mushrooms. Even some of the colloquial names for mushrooms are the same as like these fairies. So people kind of have that deep connection and sense to this kind of other world or the mysticism. And at this time as well is Samhain, which is, Halloween. And
Mhm.
Halloween was actually invented here in Ireland, or, celebrated here in Ireland first, and it went kind of around the world. And this is the start of the Celtic calendar. It's thought to be the time when kind of like the I'm not going to be able to pronounce this properly, but the Dias de la Mortas, where the veil is thin and we can connect to the other side. We can connect to our
Mm.
ancestors. We have that spirit bridge. We can, move to the other world. And this is very shamanic. And this is also the time that mushrooms grow in Ireland. So, maybe this was, one of the things that was what catalyzed this in the kind of Celtic, paganistic, culture. Um, so there are those little clues. There are those little clues still out there, and there is a really a big revival to, reclaim that, reclaim the psilocybin mushrooms as our indigenous medicine.
Mm.
And I think, a lot of the psychedelic culture from the South Americas is pointing us towards that. It's not like be this. It's more like, go home to your roots and find
Mhm.
what's authentically yours. And I think that's very important for different cultures because. Um, there's something so ancient and so ancestral and so rooted in being on the land and working with what you have in your own area.
I love that. Can you say a little bit more about how psychedelics can actually connect us to our ancestry, our own lineage, intergenerational wisdom or trauma? You can reference personal experiences or professional experiences. It's just a topic that I love, and I'm always
Mm,
so curious to hear from people who know that realm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. For me, this is one of the, it's such a magical thing, and as a scientist, very skeptical of a lot of things that I don't, experience myself. And some of these kind of mystical transformational experiences are, what we know now through the science are the primary indicator of a positive experience.
Mm,
Um, for me, I've had some incredible psychedelic experiences where I've, met people, had visions of, relatives from long, long time ago, who, embody or allow me to access certain insights or wisdom. It could be on the nature of resilience or strength or whatever it is at the time that I'm trying to understand. In the therapeutic container that we create with InwardBound, it's very common for people to meet, their father who's passed away or their mother or grandmother. And people meeting those kind of ancestors or deceased loved ones, and having that moment in their mind can bring incredible kind of therapeutic resolution for them.
mm,
Um, you know, People, even touching hands or just being there or, seeing them and feeling them in a very deep and special way. Um, can be like profoundly healing because sometimes, people have said like, oh, I don't dream of them anymore. They're
mm,
not there. I don't feel them. I have lost that connection with them ever since they passed. And, having that connection, having that feeling can bring someone a profound sense of relief, either knowing that, they're okay and they're not suffering anymore, or, they're getting the strength and the resilience from them or the insights and family wisdom, and then they feel like they have access to something. They feel like they have a piece of them that they can then move forward into life. And then kind of like on the intergenerational trauma, I love a lot of the work by Gabor Mate, you know, how this stuff is like passed down through the lineage, stuff that's encoded into our beliefs, encoded into our culture, our way of being, who we think we are. And in that space, it's an opportunity for people to kind of come home more to their authenticity and see some of these beliefs or truths as not true for them. Maybe it was an early coping mechanism, an early strategy that kept them safe and protected at a young age, or in their childhood or teens. And that now, as an adult, they can let go of this. For the main one, for example, that I see with a lot of Irish people is this kind of scarcity mentality
Mm,
or poverty consciousness. As Irish people, this was really ingrained into our culture as people because of the kind of the famine and the lack of food resources and having to emigrate. And there's always this kind of like, oh, I don't have enough. I need more. I
mhm,
need like this much to be safe, and there's not enough for everybody. And some of these beliefs really get into people, and then it disrupts their relating. So, you know, I think when that in the space is acknowledged that, I have enough, I have everything I need, and people feel that on like a deep level, then there can be
mm.
kind of a bigger kind of transformation. So that's just one example as something that, yeah, I've experienced myself and also seen with other people.
Is reconnecting or intergenerational trauma healing things that lead people to one of your retreats? I know definitely intergenerational trauma healing has led me to psychedelics before, but I'm curious when someone comes on one of your retreats or one of your experiences, is it is that what leads them there? Or is it more trauma processing or healing? What is kind of, yeah, what leads someone there?
Yeah, yeah, it would be probably more so, yeah, people looking for healing trauma, people working with mild depression, anxiety. I think, people come into the space not using a lot of language,
Mm,
but what they are presenting is intergenerational trauma. It's like stuff from their parents, the mother
mhm,
wound, father wound. They're trying to heal on that inner child work, working on very very early kind of belief systems or things that happen to them in early childhood. A lot of people that come on the retreats have done therapy, so they do have a kind of an idea of kind of what's going on, and they're at that level where they now feel stuck, and they want to take it to the next level. They
mm.
really want to push through, or they're still something's not clicking, they're still disconnected. So yeah, we do see, it is intergenerational trauma sometimes, but maybe they don't use the the
The
language on
language.
that. We've also, had, mother, fathers, families, and seeing them from a more systemic approach, working on this kind of family dynamics and this
Mm.
kind of thing. I also see that as kind of this baggage that's been passed down, how the father relates to the family and how the mother relates to the family and the dynamics in the system, and how, conscious awareness can be brought to that to, let everybody, step more into their selves in that kind of system.
The next question I have for you, and I'm just thinking here about intergenerational trauma and the language, is you named the work that you've done with masculinity and hosting men's work. What is the overlap that you see between those two things? I mean, I see a huge overlap in regards to the beliefs that we have, the stories we're told, what we're told we can and cannot be. How do you experience that overlap in your work, and in what areas are they maybe quite different too?
Yeah, great question. So the question is around the overlap between men's work and the psychedelic work.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the men's work really astounds me sometimes because it's totally sober.
Mm,
We'll have a cacao ceremony, maybe if it's appropriate on one retreat. Um, and it really blows me away the power and the depth and the medicine that can be produced in men only spaces, and it's the same for women only spaces too. So I've heard. But there's something so ancient and so natural about a group of men coming together in a circle, a group of men coming together around the fire. Um, if we look back, mostly men would have went out, hunted for days on end, would have went out kind of scouting, and there would have been that deepening of the male relationship. And, unfortunately, we know society is kind of cut that off, men are kind of instantly kind of pitted against each other from day
Hmm.
one through school and sport and intellect and strength and physicality. So when men come together into that space, there's a very interesting kind of phenomenon, I think, that happens where, you know, vulnerability comes into the room very quickly, and it can almost take one man to catalyze that in the space, and then everyone goes, "Oh, whoa, it's not just me." Everyone's like, wow, like I also suffer with those things. And there's this kind of common sense of humanity where everybody feels, oh wow, we're in this together. And then over the space of the days, it kind of deepens and builds, and men start to create this safety in the container because I know women a lot of the time don't feel safe with men, but men also
Hmm.
don't feel safe with men. Men hurt men just as much as they hurt women, as well. Um, so a lot of men are the way they are because of being bullied by other men in school,
Hmm.
and having a really hard time, and growing up in this kind of really competitive, difficult society. Um, so there's this kind of beauty that can happen where men are vulnerable, they're open, and another thing I can only speak for the spaces I've been in mostly in Ireland, where there's a lack of body awareness in men, and
Hmm.
there's a lack of feeling the body and being able to articulate their feelings and being able to articulate what's going on. So as men start to get more of the language, more connection to the body, it kind of creates more authenticity in the space, and men can just open up, connect, have a laugh, kind of share that kind of camaraderie and deep connection. And it's also boisterous and fun. Men,
Hmm.
love to play, love to wrestle, rough and tumble, and there's just a really incredible beauty in that space. And it's funny because when one woman is put into the room, which I've experienced in
Hmm.
in the past, the whole dynamic changes. The whole
Interesting.
the whole dynamic changes for all the men. A really interesting phenomenon, I suppose. Um, yeah, because there's maybe a perception of how I need to be seen, what I can
Hmm.
say, how I need to act, how I need to behave. Um, but I've also experienced, that woman can also create an incredible softening in the space too,
Hmm.
and bring a lot of power and potency to the men in the space, feeling seen and heard and validated, and getting that kind of feminine, female lens on things too. So, the men's work is really wonderful. I feel so passionate about it. The main reason that I got into men's work was while I was doing my PhD, two of my male colleagues were taken by suicide. So this was around the time that I started to work on myself, a few years uh, over those years. And I really felt that, if men had this kind of safe space to connect, to open up, and access to resources and kind of knowledge, that they would, you know,
Hmm.
would have been saved. And I've had so many men from those circles say, like, you've saved lives doing this work. And that's the greatest gift I can ever receive,
Hmm.
is knowing that someone's not losing a husband or father or brother unnecessarily. Here in Ireland, male suicide is at the highest rate in Europe. So yeah, it's a great space to really be involved in.
That was one of the things that when I originally met you, that I just felt this deep connection to in a way that I haven't felt with anyone else. And I haven't shared this previously anywhere, but someone I previously dated ended up taking their life, or choosing that the suffering was too large. And that for me was such a crumbling moment because even though I knew they were struggling and we were still in contact, loosely we're friends, it really changed my perception of mental health and really made me so aware of how much of the language I used was so femme-centered. And even though, even at that time, I had men in my practice and have always felt deeply motivated towards trying to create spaces for men, it really shattered the illusion that what I was doing was enough when the language was so insular and kept men out. And I would love to hear from you how you even just start from a language-based perspective to start to have these conversations with men when the language of mental health, thanks to Freud, is very femme-centered. And, a lot of it comes from hysteria and issues that women were having around sexuality. And it's even though most of the language does come from men, it is centered to the femme experience, which then excludes men from being part of the conversation.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I've never really thought about it from that kind of lens. I was reading recently was a really big moment for me around Carl Jung, and everybody loves Carl Jung. It's his work is so in vogue at the moment,
Yes.
but I just read something and it was great. It was like super deep in the comments. I'm a bit nerdy when it comes to these things, but I go at least 50 comments down on good posts, and someone said like in a really nice way that all of this kind of modern depth psychology, archetypes, shadow work is coming through the male perspective and, male language, male perspective, male mind. And I was like, whoa, really? And I'd never really thought about that. And then there was, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, one of, I think, Jung's students who was a female, and she has stuff out there. Um, and I only recently ordered the heroine's journey as well. So I think it's fascinating that there is these kind of two lenses, and what the real power is obviously when they come together, as we know, bringing the anima and animus together. Um, I think in these spaces with men, there's actually, what's the first layer that we almost need to get through? It's the layer of shame. So kind of having very um accepting language around shame and very affirming language around whatever's happened to you isn't you, um and kind of creating a space for an opening, creating a space for that kind of vulnerability. So, allowing the men know that, all parts of them are welcome. Everything that you bring here is accepted, is welcome, can be held, can be looked at, can be seen. So creating this very inclusive space is really important. And also important because we have men of all sexual orientations, which is really great too, because they also bring their own unique perspective and lens. So it's kind of creating the safety around, shame isn't, you are inherently bad. It's maybe something that's happened to you that you're holding on to, but it's not you. All parts are welcome. And yeah, kind of creating that kind of openness and opening for vulnerability and acceptance, is really important.
What do you feel like are the biggest barriers that get in the way? Is it mostly just the shame, or are there other pieces too?
Yeah, definitely. Shame is one of the biggest one. Yeah, that it's almost like too much to let out or too much to handle.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely anger. Some men might feel that, my anger is so great that if I let it out, I'm gonna, destroy the room or destroy people around me. And there's like kind of this deep suppression of it.
Hmm.
And then there's this kind of holding of it, and it comes out in these unconscious, passive aggressive kind of ways. Um, yeah, this kind of feeling that, whatever's going on is too great, is too explosive or too much,
Hmm.
which is funny. Well, not funny, but interesting for men that they, a lot of men feel that they're too much sometimes.
Hmm.
And it's something that I hear in couples work a lot is like the men say to the women, "Oh, you're too much. Your emotions are too much,"
Hmm.
but the men feel it too because I think as guys get older, I see that a lot of them start to disconnect from their practices and their outlets. And where an outlet might have been, sports or the gym or releasing that energy, or anger in a kind of constructive, healthy way, that stops happening, and then it gets suppressed down, and then they kind of get a bit more explosive and triggered easier.
Hmm.
Um, so I really feel that, yeah, the anger, the shame are definitely blocks. And then, whoa, the societal narratives around, big boys don't cry.
Hmm.
Man up. I know in Ireland we have, when we grow up, we hear like, children should be seen and not heard.
Hmm.
And I think for men, especially, not being able to show this sadness, vulnerability, through crying.
Hmm.
Um, I see this in the men's work, and I've also seen this in the psychedelic work with men, is, having that moment of tears and letting it out can be so powerful, so beautiful, and so cathartic. And, just seeing that being held in the group, and everyone's like,
Hmm.
yes, cheering him on. Go on, he did it. He got it out. You could see their face like
Hmm.
changes, you can see like the worry, the lines, the crunch, that kind of scrunchness in the body kind of just, it opens. And,
Hmm.
you know, it's a beautiful place when guys get there. And you know what, we had one man who said, he hadn't cried in 30 years, and he got that release, and it was profound for him.
That language, like boys don't cry or children are meant to be seen, not heard, that in my mind, it all kind of is a part of the barrier that I have to work with when I work with men and support them. Like, okay, we have to undo that language and those scripts, then find our own kind of language for our feelings, for our emotions, how we connect to our body. And this is where I sometimes encounter some of the really deeply femme language of mental health is around the realm of embodiment and reconnection. And like, it's very hard sometimes for my masculine identifying clients to engage with that language, even though the theory is for them. I'm curious to hear from you how you kind of work around that when you are inviting a man to connect to his body. Because I've said that to lots of male clients and they've just looked at me like, I very quickly learned I got to try again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a really interesting point. It's you know, I think how a lot of men are connecting to their bodies is through, I think like yoga is almost like one step away. I think that like the step in between is like at the moment, which is one of the biggest one, is men getting into cold water.
Yeah, I know.
And it's like you're gonna do this for like resilience and strength and whatever, the language that they say in those spaces. For me, I like jumping in the Irish Sea every now and then, but sitting in ice baths has never really been my main thing. But it's kind of like this first step into feeling the body, into the feeling body. And also what's quite popular now are sweat lodges,
Mm,
particularly for men. Um, Here in Ireland, and I know there's a lot in the UK as well. And for this, it's kind of like you're going into this for a reason that's bigger than you.
mm,
It's kind of like this is what maybe it's kind of a little bit of traditionalist, because I think a lot of the ceremonies are quite traditional, especially when they come from the South Americas, where it's like, the men are doing this work for the tribe, they're doing this work for the clan, they're doing this work for the family system. They're going in, they're purifying themselves, letting everything out, sweating out, in honor of their ancestors, in honor of those who came before, and they're doing this work not for themselves, but for the community and for the kind of
mm,
the village. So it's kind of almost like doing it for the greater good, so to speak. And I think, men love this kind of sense of, fulfillment through being the protector, being the provider, being the container or the safe space. And I think, sweat lodges and maybe jumping in ice, kind of really really does it for guys at the moment. It's kind of like pushing the body a little bit,
mm,
to start with, kind of gets them into their body. And I know as well, like, guys love to lift really heavy weights, and we love to do marathons and ultra marathons and all of these kind of things to like almost like push ourselves into the body.
mhm,
Um, and that can kind of be the gateway. But it's really interesting that I've noticed as well that, for a lot of people, their nervous systems can't handle that. For
mhm,
example, mine, I'm not going to the first thing I'm going to do is not going to jump in an ice bucket. So there has to be this kind of like slow progress
Hmm.
into these practices. And sometimes it's almost like once you get them in the door, then you can be a little bit malleable with them, getting
Hmm.
men to just move, close their eyes, take the focus off the room, and get into movement. And all of a sudden, then you have like 40 guys in front of you, like dancing to music, and they're all so happy, because guys love to dance, but doing it sober and not in a club is maybe a little bit awkward. Um, so I think I'll leave it there.
Hmm. I'm curious to hear from you what narratives you received growing up or even as an adult around your body or being in your body, because I have heard some really interesting narratives from my clients, and a lot of them are just like pushing, using the body as a machine, that their body isn't for them, it's an object. And why I'm asking you this question is there is a really strong dialogue in regards to women and the relationship they have with their bodies and objectification and exploitation and all of these pieces. And I don't feel like there's really rarely any conversation around how those concepts also apply to men.
Yeah, it's a really great one. Thanks for asking that. Growing up, I had a really interesting relationship with my body, as do a lot of guys, and I know we don't really talk about it in for a variety of reasons. And growing up, there was definitely, I felt, more focus on women and women's issues with their bodies, particularly because in the circles around me, people had bulimia and anorexia and these kind of conditions. It was more so in the girl schools than it was in the male schools. However, I feel that men have or boys growing up have a different narrative, that you need to be strong, you need to be big, you're
Mhm.
weak, your muscles aren't big enough. So, these were a lot of the narratives that I was getting. So from a very young age, 13, I started to really be aware of, my body was actually quite skinny. I was
Mm.
tall. I grew really fast. I had, like, big feet, long limbs, as most
Mhm.
teenage boys do. And I, like, people were saying, "Oh, you're so skinny, would you eat more?" And this kind of thing. And that led me into, really early on, lifting weights to get bigger, to get stronger, to kind of put that muscle on. And I think a lot of guys who lift weights very, very young do it from a place of, I want to put this armor on now. I want to put this
Mhm.
protection on. I want to put this kind of shield around me, so that if I'm big and strong, no one's going to come near me. I'm going to be seen
Mhm.
as the strong man, and no one's gonna fight me. Um, so I definitely think that runs through a lot of boys' minds. And then there's this other narrative as well of, to be hot or to be beautiful, you need to have a six pack. And I still see this to this day on Instagram. Some of the content I get from a lot of these, gym bros and coaches and lifestyle diet coaches and stuff, are like, get your six pack abs in 6 weeks, you know. And it's kind of, it's very challenging for men, especially for men who, maybe just physiologically their body holds more weight than
Mhm.
other guys, and then they don't feel beautiful. And I've had moments of that in my life where I've looked down, I've had a belly, you know. If you go through college, if you go through exams, if you go through a PhD, you know the drill. You eat food to keep you going, and you put on weight. A lot of people do. And it can be really, really tough then on guys to feel like they must have a certain body, they must show up. And I've experienced the kind of toxicity in clubs where women have come to me and, like, lifted up my top, show me your abs, show me your abs, and I'm like, and it happened, it does happen. There's kind of this expectation to be beautiful, you need to be toned and fit and have like 5% body fat, which is really hard, especially in cold climates. Um, like Ireland and the UK. Um, and a part of my journey as well was, I was lifting a lot of weights. I went through a lot of these diets of, like, bulking, eating a lot of food, and then trying to lose a lot of weight. And even in one of those diets, one year, in my early 20s, I was bulimic. I was like eating too much and then feeling guilty for eating that much, overeating the amount of calories I'm supposed to, and was, yeah, suffering from bulimia. And it was just a weird phase of, this relationship to my body. People are saying, I need to be bigger and stronger, but it's also really hard to do that if you need to be 5% body fat and be fit
Mm-hmm.
and healthy, or just fit and trimmed. So, I think men have this really big challenge. And, social media also is really difficult because you see a lot of these guys from warmer climates, warmer countries who are able to eat these raw food and vegan diets and have 5% body fat, and they look, trimmed and hot. And then you're in this cold climate and you're like, that's not possible here. We need
Mm-hmm.
to eat stews and food to kind of keep us warm. So it is definitely difficult for men, and especially men who move into the fatherhood phase. You get the dad bod, and I think there's some science research out there to show that when your partner or wife or girlfriend has the baby, that your hormones as a man actually change too, and this can cause you to actually store fat as well. I saw something about that a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, phew, it's not just me, but it's also a stressful time, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe people comfort eat a little bit too, but I think men need to recognize too, just as women, that we have our cycles, we have our hormones, we
Mm-hmm.
have our fluctuations. As men get older, testosterone drops. I read a study there recently that male levels of testosterone are at the lowest that they've been in a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
Men these days, in their 30s and 40s have lower testosterone than men in the, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And people are starting to say that could be diet or
Mm-hmm.
pesticides or the chemicals that we put in our bodies, sprays, shaving cream, shower gels, all of these things are starting to be known as endocrine disruptors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's mostly women are talking about it, but I think men need to start to talk about it too.
Putting the disruptors aside, even though it's one of my favorite topics as someone who's like dealt with a lot of health issues and like is very mindful of those things, I am curious to hear from you if when you're working with men, you get to have these conversations. Is this a part of the work that you do, or is it more in a one-on-one space? And if it doesn't get to happen in the men's work, are these some of the pieces that maybe come up for men when they do a psychedelic retreat?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things I love about men's work is that, obviously myself and the facilitators hold a space, but
Mm-hmm.
receive so much medicine and gifts from everybody else in the space. We have so many incredible, talented, resourceful men show up in the spaces, from nutritional therapists, life coaches, accountants, lots of different, all walks of life. And coming into that space, people go like, oh, like I can help you with that. I studied about that. Oh, I did that in college. Like I'll support you in that. And those kind of conversations will open,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a man might ask the circle, like, these are the things I'm dealing with. Does anybody have any insights? And then you have 30 guys sitting in front of you with all of these different backgrounds saying, hey, mate, have you tried your diet? Hey, mate, have you tried maybe intermittent fasting? Oh, hey, mate, like I can give you a hand with your finances. Or, hey, mate, like, I can support you with this. And you're just like, yes, that's what it is. It's like, this is the
Mm-hmm.
community. This is the group of men showing up. Um, a lot of my work, has been mind focused. I'm a a big fitness guy as well. So I enjoy working out. Never got like super deep into it. But I'm starting to see that there are elements missing, like nutrition, understanding the body. Um, but I think it's wonderful that, most men, when they want to feel healthy and well, they'll go to the gym. That's the first port of call, or start running. And then, then it's like, all right, now can we do some mind work? Can we take care of the mind? And then it's kind of more the spirit work, purpose, fulfillment, passion, working in the relationships, desire, all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of wonderful that there's kind of more of this kind of holistic model. And then people are just curious, they're curious and
Mm-hmm.
they ask questions. What did you do in your journey, or how can I support myself better? So, we on the retreats, In the Netherlands, we specifically say take your meds every day. Meditation, exercise, good diet, sleep, and spiritual practice, and if you have all of these kind of dialed in, then you're going to be in a really better shape. So it is trying to approach all of these different avenues to create a healthy and well life.
Mm. What advice would you give for the listener who's maybe new to their journey of embodiment? Maybe just taking your meds every day. That could be it.
Yeah, new advice, I think when anybody gets into these kind of practices, they might look to some practices and go, whoa, like how am I ever going to get there? How am I ever going to do that? And the first piece of advice would be to, listen to your own body and see what brings you joy,
Mm.
what brings you bliss, what brings you pleasure. Because if you start this journey and you start doing stuff that's like, oh, this is so painful and this is like terrible, like you're not going to last 6 weeks, so find a practice, find a practice that helps you be embodied, that you enjoy, that brings you happiness, that you feel a benefit kind of after. Um, and then, this will be a lot easier path than if you're like going straight to doing, Ashtanga yoga or something.
Is there any other pieces of advice you'd like to leave with the listener before we close for today?
One of the biggest transformations was learning to love myself, learning to accept myself just how I am. Carl Rogers kind of has this beautiful quote, like the funny paradox of when I accept myself just how I am, then I can change.
Hmm.
And if we approach life with curiosity, with kindness for ourselves, whatever's going on when we wake up, whatever the day is in front of us, I feel like being able to drop into those kind of energies, um, or ways of being, will have a much more graceful, peaceful, relaxed and beautiful day. So, go easy on yourself, enjoy the
Mm.
journey. Things take time, especially if you're working on deep years of intergenerational trauma. You're not going to clear it in a weekend, So, enjoy the process, get the support, find the support, find the spaces out there that are supportive to you. And that, like I was saying with the embodiment there, one space might be for you and one space mightn't be for you. So,
Mhm.
find what works for you. And don't judge yourself if you don't enjoy cacao ceremonies, but maybe enjoy ecstatic dances.
Mhm.
Find the space that you enjoy, and find the facilitators and the mentors that you resonate with, and leave the rest. I feel like we can all be our own spiritual teacher and our own guru if we listen to ourselves and what
Mhm.
we truly need. So, yeah, listen to yourself, listen to your heart, and yeah, find what brings you the joy in life.
Thank you for just touching on that at the end. That little piece around intergenerational trauma won't be healed in a weekend. I feel like that was a good loop around to the retreats that you offer and just this embodiment that you are, which is holding support for people in an ongoing way from how, in the time I've seen you, how you kind of show up for yourself. And I feel like that's something, when I first met you, I was like, this is a person who I can feel how much time they've invested into caring for themselves. And I know that you offer
Mm.
that to others too. So thank you.
No, thank
Um,
you.
all of the information about you and what you offer will be in the show notes. Is there anything coming up that you would like the listener to know, or all your details are good enough?
Yeah, I suppose I'm not sure when you're going to launch this, but in December I have a two-part shadow work course, so
Mm,
kind of covering the basis of shadow work, some practices, theory, and then yeah, all the retreats are up on the website. Costa Rica retreats, January, February, March, Netherlands retreats for the rest of the year, and then yeah, hopefully some men's retreats in Ireland. So keep an eye on those.
beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me on.
If you found value in this episode, it would mean so much to me for you to share the podcast with friends, a loved one, or on your social platforms. If you have the time, please rate and review the podcast so that this podcast reaches a larger audience and can inspire more and more humans to connect to their bodies too. Thank you for being here and nurturing the relationship you have with your very own body.